Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our book, The Art of Supportive Leadership, and how to work with people. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, help us to understand your guidance and your words and your example, that we may in our own lives be as helpful to people, as generous, as genuinely supportive as you have always been. Help us to feel your continuing inspiration and guidance, that we may walk in your footsteps into thy infinite light. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay. At our last session, we're right at the end now of chapter 11 or 10 or whatever this is, chapter 10. But before I go through the summary of points, I wanted to spend just a little more time on what I touched at the end. I'm going to read these last two paragraphs again. Finally, a leader should always look ahead to the time when he will have to step aside and allow others to take charge. As all life is said to be a preparation for the final examination of death, so all leadership should be viewed as a preparation for that moment when one passes the reins to his successor. On how well your organization functions after you leave it, quite as much as on how well it is functioning now, can your true skill as a leader be judged. It is a sad fact that organizations rarely continue to flourish after their founder's passing. I wanted to spend a little bit of time first on just asking why Swami says that so emphatically. I've repeated all through this whole series of classes, because it is the key, that Swamiji's understanding of leadership is loyalty to people and loyalty to the best interest and the highest potential of the people who are part of your team. I'm going to stop for a moment because I've been drinking out of this Winnie the Pooh cup for the last few times. And those of you who watch me more personally might be thinking about it, because I've never had anything like this before. And it's basically everything I don't like in a cup. It's cute, it's gigantic, it's heavy. I tend to prefer something entirely different. But this has great personal significance to me. Many of you who watch these regularly know that about 2 weeks ago, a key founding member of Ananda Seva, her heart stopped quite suddenly and she died. There was no warning, just happened on a Sunday afternoon, just like that. She was 86. She'd been part of Ananda since she met Swami in 1967 or something like that. So hers was, from a spiritual perspective, hers was an extraordinary, victorious life. But I've talked a lot about that. She and I were absolutely inseparable friends for the first 10 years that I was at Ananda, and then life circumstances separated us. We never had a separation between us, but circumstances separated us. And we had a thing between us, which is that in the Pooh character, she was Winnie the Pooh and I was Piglet. And I'm not sure how I became Piglet. I did have a striped shirt, and I think it started with the striped shirt, but it became kind of personas that we enjoyed. And then as other women joined the monastery, because we lived together in a monastery, and she was the head of the monastery, which was partly why she was Winnie the Pooh. But she was also, because she was, that's the only way I can say it. We gradually, many of the other girls also assumed the character, assumed different characters. Let me phrase it differently. they manifested certain characters and so were named accordingly. Eeyore, Kanga, Little Roo, Tigger, various ones. And we even came up with a rather complicated theory of leadership, which was when you have an ideal team, every Pooh character is represented. This was not a very scientific study, but I have informally applied it, and it's surprisingly valid. I'm sure that somebody might be able to poke holes in it, but it's interesting to see. And so when Seva died, I came up the next morning to Ananda village where she lived for astral ascension, and I went over to the little cottage where she'd lived for decades. And she had died there, but her body was already gone. I was just sitting in there talking to one of the women who also was close with Seva. And they started talking about all the things that Seva has. She had many beautiful things, many of them gifts from Swami or things that had belonged to Swamiji, which were very valuable. And we were talking about how they were going to be distributed. I've been gifted with many things from Swamiji, so I didn't have any compelling need to ask for anything like that. And then I saw this cup sitting on her counter. It wasn't even in the cabinet. And I sentimentally believe that she had it because of our long ago friendship. I don't know how much the Winnie the Pooh story was continuing all those years. It may well have, but I know that this also, the Piglet and Pooh, would remind her of our time together. That was very, very touching to me. So I asked for the cup. And now, of course, it's my favorite cup. So that's a very long story on a very small point, but not really. One of the things that Swamiji said that the purpose of Ananda was to show people the power of true friendship when it's based on spiritual ideals. And he always made friendship an extremely important value within Ananda. He never trained us to be the kind of renunciates that were cold or indifferent to one another. And in fact, in another class, I've been giving based on the book Light Bearer, which is the history of Ananda through Swami. In 1983, we began to have an alliance with a lot of people from Italy. It started with this one particular group of charismatic Catholics from Sorrento, and several of them came over to stay in Ananda village from Italy. And it was the first time we'd had an influx like that. And one of them was Rosanna, the woman that Swamiji eventually married. So there was a lot of energy in the whole situation. And but one of the things that the Italians really specialize in is loving one another. They're extremely heart-centered culture. And when they came into the community, and Swami said this explicitly, they sort of brought with them this freedom of interpersonal love. And of course it can be carried too far, but there was a freedom that allowed us all to relax more deeply into that side of life. And in that context, Swami said, if you're too cold in your human relationships, he said that coldness almost always extends into your relationship with God. And so we have to practice loving in all respects. So my friendship with Seva, even though after those 10 years it never had the opportunity to express outwardly on that level, I certainly know for me, and I believe for her, it never changed inside. And even just the sort of silliness of being Piglet and Pooh, which is the kind of things, friends do with each other, I think especially girls perhaps. It meant a lot to me. And so having this cup also means a lot to me at this point. So now, coming back, I was talking, and it is actually not unrelated. I was talking about what Swamiji did to make Ananda not merely successful while he was there to run it, but to build it into something that had real enduring power. And actually, I think the word friendship is the answer to it. The relationship that Swami had with us, and I used the phrase yesterday, a simple, unassuming friend, was the role that he took. But as the years passed and his stature became more widely recognized on a global basis, and then in the last 15 years of his life, where he himself was less protective of his own consciousness, he protected, he veiled his consciousness is the word that I would use, because it was always the same. But he wanted us to be at ease in his company, to be natural in our relationship with us, and therefore to be able to become simply, first and foremost, friends with one another. Master said that of all the human relationships, friendship is is the highest, because he said it's entirely uncoerced. You know, even mother love and father love also, parental love, but thinking of a mother who has to give birth and then has to literally feed the child through her own body, there's an element of coerciveness to it. The baby will die if you don't take care of it. And once the pregnancy begins, nowadays you can intervene, but traditionally, once the pregnancy begins, you don't have a choice. So that selfless service to another person is demanded of you because of the circumstances. But friendship is entirely freely chosen. It has no form, it has no compelling element, it just simply is. So when we give our friendship to someone, we are giving it entirely out of free will choice. So even with the guru, the relationship of friendship is considered, Master said, to be the most elevated relationship for the same reason, freely given. Jesus, at the end of his life, said to his disciples, "You call me master, but I call you friend." It's very, very interesting to meditate on. He said, you know, the servant takes care of the master's business, but the servant always has his home somewhere else and is just there because it's compelled upon him. He may love it and love his master and choose to serve him, but then it's moving into the element of friendship. But a friend who takes upon himself to share the responsibilities of his friend, again, he does it entirely by free choice. And when you bring into that the idea of Guru Seva is selfless service to the Guru. And so if one understands that this is a friendship, even with the master, and his cause becomes my cause. I mean, there is a particular power in that because of the freedom of choice. I remember with Swamiji, when my exploration of the spiritual path before I met Swami in 1969, it was guided by the group of friends that I was with, and there was a strong bias toward Vedanta and what that meant in this concept. Vedanta is the explanation of the cosmos, the nature of reality. This life is a dream. Everything that we think of as real is just Maya. It's all a delusion that will fade away. The only lasting truth is our oneness with God. That's the principles of Vedanta. So that can be interpreted to mean, why should I care about anything in this world? And this is where a certain coldness in human relationships can come in, a certain indifference to friendship can come in, because it's all Maya anyway. An acquaintance of ours, became a thief on the basis of Vedanta. What does it matter anyway? I'll just make my living by stealing things. It did not work out well for him because there were certain flaws, but you can see how that teaching can lead you to miss the point, which is something that Patanjali warns against, missing the point. Well, because of that orientation, and because I was inclined that way anyway, to be exceedingly mental in my approach to things, when I came to Ananda, I was biased against working. I was biased against the importance of doing a work in this world. I was there for Swami Kriyananda. I was there to learn the spiritual path. I was there to find God. And Swami was building Ananda. And I was awfully glad that he was doing it because it gave me a place to live. It gave me a way to serve because I did want to serve. But the Vedanta ideas were, Swami was approaching Ananda with so much determination and willpower. And I just couldn't relate to that. I could see him doing it. I was adding my little bit, but I was doing it because it was fun. But the seriousness with which he went about it, because he'd been commissioned by Master to do a great work. And this founding of communities was something that Master really wanted, that Swamiji felt personally in tune with and wanted to give himself to. But I just didn't care. That's the only way I can actually think to say it. And I remember after I'd been there, it wasn't very long. I mean, within the first year or two, it wasn't a long time. I was in the back seat of Swami's car. Perhaps he was driving or Seva was driving. And we were driving through the rutted dirt roads from one end of Ananda to the other, Ananda village, which was the only Ananda there was. And I remember looking out the window, and I looked at the barn, and I looked at just, a few little houses, a little tiny bit of building here and there. And I appreciated that every bit of that had just been dragged up out of the bare ground. Like there was nothing there. It was created primarily by Swami's willpower and a little bit of effort on our part. And I felt Swami was just giving everything he had to make this a success because Master had asked him to do it. And there I was, and I was grateful beyond human capacity to express for Swami's role in my life, that I had found someone who was truly wise, who had the answers to the questions that I was asking, and was also committed to helping me grow and understand. And I was helping Swami. I must have been his secretary by that point. So we were perhaps a few years into it. So I was writing letters for him, making his travel plans. I was cooking. I was typing his manuscript. I was doing all these things that were Guru Seva, very one-to-one service to him. But it occurred to me that the only thing that was important to Swamiji was to serve Master in all the ways that Master wanted him to. And I was contributing. But I thought to myself, a friend cares about what's important to his friend. You don't just say, well, you're trying to do all this work and I'm your friend, but I don't care about that. I don't care about what's important to you. I'm not going to help you with what's important to you. I'm going to take from you everything I want, but I'm not going to embrace what's important to you. And I thought, this is not right. This is not friendship. This is not appropriate. There's a lot of other things I could say now about this is not even spiritually beneficial. This is going to block what you're trying to draw from Swami, but I didn't understand it all that clearly. I just knew that I was there to learn from him. This is how he was expressing himself. And if for no other reason than just to be his friend, in gratitude for all the benefit I was getting from his effort, I needed to embrace it with the same passion that he embraced it. Now, that progression of understanding, and then, of course, I began to apply myself to it, and the more I applied myself And this has been like in all the decades since, because it was a number of years before I really had the capacity to contribute beyond making tea and typing manuscript. But as I began to commit myself to it, first because he was committed to it, and it was service to him, but then I began to feel the profound extent to which I too had been born for this cause. And it was because of the way Swami raised us. And this comes back to, how does the organization, the entity you've created, continue after you pass? Is it entirely dependent on your inspiration, your vision, your vitality? Or have you actually been able to transfer to others whatever that divine spark is that burns within you and enables you to go forward with so much energy? And in order to do that also, all the principles that are described in this book, supportiveness, and the next chapter we're going to talk about go with people's strengths, cultivating creativity in the people who work with you, allowing people to follow their own ideas and learn from their mistakes. And these are just some of the principles. To be humble and self-sacrificing so that the people who work for you will feel respected and that we're all in this together. And above all, is to be able over time to continually inspire those who work with you with the deepest understanding you yourself have about why we are doing this. Now, of course, it's wonderful if you have truly meaningful work, But if you are leading a group and you are especially if you're founding or forming an entity, you may not be the actual founder, but nonetheless you're creating a culture and a mission. It needs to be on principles as universal as you can make them. Now, it may not be, of course, working for the cause of self-realization for all, working to fulfill a guru's mission is a very noble undertaking. But to build an honest company that provides a product or a service that has integrity, that is not downward pulling to people's consciousness, but is either simply practically relevant or, better still, inspiring or uplifting in some way, to provide honest employment for people that's fairly paid, where the compensation is generous and consistent, in which people are allowed to have a life and not merely have a job, where the culture of the company is that we have human as well as business values, and that we continue to run this platform in a way that honors these principles. This is well worth doing. Most of the world is just taking care of itself, and this is noble. The nobility of an enterprise isn't only, or is not entirely defined by what it is that you're actually doing. It's the consciousness with which you do it. A friend of mine who has just worked, he's been a factory supervisor in several different industries, including food production, and making a product. The last job that he had in that field was just an ordinary product. It was a product similar to ketchup, but it wasn't really ketchup. It was something like that. But he created an atmosphere where everybody who worked there felt privileged to be able to work for such a good company. Now, think about that. Think how many people have to work in environments where they feel compromised every day. That is a very noble enterprise. I'm trying to just bring this down to make it practical no matter where you are. And how we continually pass that vision on and become very clear in ourselves. What am I really doing here? And make that a constant point of conversation. Where it becomes ineffective is when it's hypocritical. But when it's really and deeply sincere, then it can be profoundly inspiring. We have no idea the extent to which we can influence the world. One person puts out a little bit of high-minded energy. It uplifts others. They put out the same high-minded energy, and it just goes on and on and on. This is our sole responsibility in this world. It takes whatever form it's going to take, just depending on our karma. All of us have different karmas. All of us have different responsibilities that we have to carry through. But every karma can be carried out in a high-minded way. And the more high-minded we are about what we're doing, the more power we build. And the more we gradually attract similarly high-minded people, because that's what the atmosphere is that we have. And then we trust them. I was very amused once. At one point, Swami started thinking about, he was always thinking about it. Swami always had a long-range vision of what he was doing. As I think I remarked to you once, he said to some of us when he was changing our jobs really often, you're going to have communities of your own. I don't want you to have just specialized knowledge. You need to understand how all aspects of a community run. And he was right. Those of us he was training in that way, most of us have gone on to have positions of great responsibility in a lot of different places. So Swami was always thinking about that. He was always thinking not merely, how can I accomplish my little goal, but how can we build a power that will spread high-minded energy as far as it can be spread. So part of what gave it the magnetism was the selflessness of it, from Swami's point of view. Selfless in the sense that he just had one wish, which was to help people. And everything else was a means to an end. And help people in the truest sense. So, as I said yesterday, by the time Swamiji exited from this planet, he had already, and in fact long since, turned over the administration of Ananda to his successor Jyotish and Devi, who became the worldwide leaders of Ananda, and at this time still are. He'd already turned over most of the actual responsibility to them. In the position that I have been in for some decades now in relation to the community here, he made it possible for those who wanted to expand to the limit of our ability to expand. And he taught us to be inspired from the inside, which, of course, in his unique spiritual position, meant that the relationship with him was not interrupted by death. But of course, that's not true for most leaders, so I can't really say that. But he taught us that it was within us. It was manifested through him, that kind of clarity and inspiration. But he constantly said to us, well, that which I do, you shall do in greater things. That's how Jesus put it to his disciples. Swami never set himself as separate in his potential. He said the same capabilities that he had were simply the result of attunement to a higher power, to Master. And that attunement was a door that was open to all of us. And that's the real gift. God bless you, my friend.